Is there any trouble at sea? A series of unforgettable events have pushed Indian seafood exporter to the brink. First, there was a COVID induced disruption, and the now report suggests that Indian fishing exports have suffered collateral damage in the ongoing tussle between India and China. So, in the 2 days, we will discuss about the what went wrong and how bad the situation actually is. So, okay, so here is what happened after the border standoff. Indian decided to impose a certain punitive action its neighbors. The most popular movie included the ban on the hundreds of the Chinese apps. China, meanwhile, retaliated by the targeting India's seafood exporters. They repeatedly rejected Indian shipments, alleging that they were the contaminated with the COVID. In one particular instance, Chinese custom officials claimed they found the traces of the COVID 19 on samples of the frozen cuttlefish exported by one of the Indian company. And the while this could be the constitute the legitimate complaint by some, many observers believe this is the simple a tactic to disrupt trade, especially when you consider how India has been treating Chinese importers over these past few months. For instance, in June, several reports pointed out that Indian custom officials were physically examining all imports from China. There were allegations about how authorities were doing this just to spite the Chinese. And obviously, in the response, China started delaying clearance of Indian exports. This tit for tat business disrupted the trade equation rather considerably, and seafood exporters were the primary casualties. According to the Seafood Exporters Association of India, the Chinese have rejected Indian seafood shipment for the 2 months and also withheld payments. And when the importers withhold payments, it kick off a pernicious cycle. Your usual export cycle goes for a toss. You can no longer ship the next batch until they clear the payments, and that affects you, your suppliers, and the all stakeholders involved. The association states that the payment worth 1,200 crores were the pending on the Chinese side, and the goods that normally reached its intended destination in 20 days now took to 45 days. With the payment being delayed for the 55 days, many exporters had to simply throw in the towel because they had no money to keep their business going. And look, it might seem like a bit of an overreaction, but China is the largest export destination for India's seafood. We export close to a quarter of our produce to the Red Dragon, and the exports of the crocus and ribbon fish almost solely depend on the Chinese demand. They are crippled right now, and the problem has cascaded onto the grassroots, and it's affecting ordinary fishermen and the boat workers. Since exporters are in a financial binds, they have stopped buying fresh seafood from the locals. In Gujarat, for instance, around 80% of fishing vessels aren't operational anymore. Exporters want to buy seafood on credit, and fishermen are desperate for money, and they can't agree on terms. Exporters demand a steep discount while buying on the cash. It's just created a massive financial quandary for all the parties involved. Oh, and it's also further aggravated by the container shortage problem we spoke about in couple of months ago. So the people that lease containers often have to deal with the peculiar problem when they ship a consignment to the US, for instance. They are hoping that the container can also be used to ship another consignment back home. So when the exports match import, everybody is happy. Containers can go one way and return home, whilst being productive at all the time. However, what if you don't find anything once you are at the destination? What if you are forced to ship the container back home empty? That's an added cost since an empty container doesn't make anybody any money. It's just take up space, and when exporters vastly outstrip imports, you have a bunch of containers piling up in one place and deficit in another location, creating what is called the container imbalance. And with shipment not being cleared right now, thousands of refrigerated containers are piling up at Chinese port. It's becoming increasingly expensive to find the containers, and it's happening across the board. Consider, for the instance, the situation at the Kochi port. The Kochi port has limited capacity to handle the large shipping vessel because its waters aren't deep enough. So the Indian exporters have to rely on the ports in Sri Lanka to get the job done. They have to first load their the consignments on smaller ship, sail to the Colombo port for the instance, and then transfer the consignment on to the bigger vessels. Unfortunately, however, workers at the Colombo were dealing with the spate of the COVID infections in October. Naturally, there was a blockage of the delayed shipment and the container began to pile up at the Colombo. So yeah, we have a container problem, we have a angry neighbor, and we have a government that's probably not being very proactive for the most part. And unless they can intervene and help all the stakeholders involved, this problem is not going to go any time soon. Until then, goodbye.